Hello and welcome to another week on Emotional Serenity channel. My name is Roberto Rodriguez and I will be your host. And I'm delighted to have you with us today. Who or what is God? This is the topic that I want to discuss this week, and why is it important for the emotional recovery process. Now, this is a topic that has been discussed plenty of times, and it's perhaps one of those topics that causes most polarity in people. Whether the discussion is existence or non-existence and things like that. But there are as many definitions of what or who God is as people are on earth, figuratively speaking. But the idea of God is being projected as perceived so many different ways and so many different times that it is important, obviously, to come to an understanding of what God is, but it is essential for the emotional recovery that we understand what or God or who God is for us, and the role that He plays in this process of emotional recovery. As I mentioned, because we are based on a perception, or we're perception based or driven individuals, it will be an impossible task to define how the world in general sees God, because you might have a definition of God and I have a different definition of God. But the important point in here is that we have to move from perceiving God to understanding God, meaning that we have to get rid of those filters we use to perceive reality in order for us to come to a common understanding of what God is. In general, God is perceived as an entity, and whether it is material or incorporeal, or whether however we conceive it, we understand that God is an entity. And on general basis, this entity that we've projected from ourselves, right, based on perception, we've given him almost supernatural power. So we maximize, we put all that is strenuous and big and large and superlative into the character of that definition that we have of God. And it is important because at some point God has become, or needs to become, a figure for us to trust, someone that can lead us or guide us through this process of emotional recovery. But the problem with this perception-based God figure we've created is that it answers the needs and perspective of our own reality. So whether you believe that God exists, or whether you believe that doesn't exist, or you call him Allah or Buddha or God or Jesus Christ or Yahweh or whatever you want to call it, the creation, this conceptual creation we've made of God, based on projection of ourselves, it works for us because it answers to the reality that we've created, this illusion that we've created based on the egoic mind or the egotist mind of ourselves. But what is God for emotional serenity? God, for the recovery program and emotional serenity, plays the central role of the being that will somehow bring sanity to what have already been lost in our insane minds. And I'm not saying that everyone is crazy, but what I mean by insane and sanity is that we now live in this paradigm we've created that has led us into these circumstances of addiction, whether it is substance addiction, or whether it is pornography addiction, or whether it is food addiction, or whether it is simply what we explain as the emotional addiction. We see the word negative, right? So it's brought us here. This paradigm hasn't brought us to a place where we can consider ourselves to be constantly happy. So God plays the central role of that trust that we have placed in ourselves before. Now we place it in this superior, higher being, this superpower that we create, something that is more powerful, greater, higher than us. And this is what God plays for emotional serenity. And at some point during the process in emotional serenity, we need to accept that the construct that we've made of God, as we understand it, needs to be dissolved, for the reason that if we still perceive Him as we have perceived Him before, we will struggle understanding that the role He plays as the guide or the trustworthy being, where we we engage in our recovery, is not just all powerful and higher than us, and it's not that just the human attributes are exalted in His character, but that the human attributes that we understand of ourselves are false. And once we accept that, we will start discovering that the central being, or the central role being that we have in the recovery, is all benevolent, that is all loving. And little by little we will get to know Him better, and we will get to know that His role is nothing more than to bring to us this stability, serenity, happiness, peace, that He has no other purpose than this. So it is important that we accept it as we understand it now. That is fine, but at some point in the process it will dissolve into a more personal relationship of an entity, of a being for us. And why is it important for us to understand that He's all benevolent, that His only goal is to bring happiness and peace? Dr. Schuckman, in her book, A Work in Miracles, which is one of the books we use to receive concepts and some understanding and light on the issues of emotional recovery, she describes there is a section in her book, early in the book, that she talks about the misconception of the ego, of the egotist mind. And she talks about how darkness, or the concept that we have of darkness, we understand that it is used to hide things. Meaning that when someone is engaged in an addictive behavior, or is going through a depression, or a very harsh emotional situation, a trauma, the first intention of the egotist mind is to hide, to bottle up those feelings. And Dr. Schuckman is mentioning that the liberation of that bottling up, that is a poison to our soul, is a two-step conceptual learning. And she talks about that the first step is learning that darkness cannot hide anything. So this is the first step for that liberation, that freedom of emotional happiness and peace. So one, that darkness cannot hide anything. And then the second step, once you understand that darkness cannot hide anything, that whatever, how deep you think you bottle up the feeling, is still inside you. So even for your own reality, it cannot be hidden, because it's still there. You bottle up, you've chosen to ignore it, but it cannot disappear. So the darkness, you cover that, is not hiding anything, not to you, not to God. So darkness cannot hide. And the second step is understanding that even if darkness could actually hide anything, you don't want to, because you have this all benevolent, all loving, all merciful being that is waiting for you to reach, and he's reaching to you to heal the wound. So rather than bottling up, understanding that you cannot hide it, and then that even if you could, you don't want to, because you want to liberate yourself from the poison, is a key step into that path of liberation, freedom, and emotional happiness. And I understand that for many, God, or the concept of God, may bring even anger, or skepticism, or just love, or many different feelings. And it's, like I said, it's very, it brings a lot of polarity in people. And let me share how I've gone through many different stages in my relationship with God. And perhaps you will, as I go through those cycles I've gone in my relationship with Him, that you will identify yourself in one of those cycles. So I was born a very religious person in a very religious home and environment, and I was raised to believe in a God as the Judeo-Christian culture believes in, right? And I grew up and we went to church, and as I went to church and learned more about what we can find in the scriptures, I was a very open-minded child and individual. And even in my youth, I was open to reading about not just what Christ was or what I understood was my God, but I was open to Buddhism, and I studied Buddhism as well. And then and I have a Quran in my home, and then the Torah as well. And so all these different influences were coming into my life. So, but deep inside in my subconscious, God had become someone that I could use as it was convenient for me, and throughout life, because I had a very good childhood, even though I had some traumatic experiences that accompanied me later on as I discovered in my emotional recovery process. But on the general basis, I was a happy kid that grew up with expectations and ambitions and all of that. And God was there, and if I got stuck, I could reach out to Him, right? But as long as I had everything in control, I was happy. It was okay. And I grew up, and life became a little more complicated, as you all know, as we grow up and we go into adulthood, and we're presented to all these different feelings and sensations. And then I learned more about my sexuality and about politics and about feelings and how to understand feelings and about relationships or deep emotional lasting relationships. So I was learning all these things that are very complex and tough to understand. And again, I could reach out to God whenever I thought I needed Him. But on the most part, I walked my life with I'm in control, things are going well. But then as you all know probably from other videos that I've shared already, something very traumatic happened. My two children were diagnosed with autism. And although the actual diagnosis was kind of a relief, because something was going on that was weird for us, it wasn't normal, and then we could put a label on it, we were relieved by the diagnosis initially, but then we went into this cycle of grief of trying to solve the world by ourselves, and studying all this literature about autism and how we could solve it and help my child. And then we've gone from that to I wanted to kill myself, and I wanted to divorce my wife, and I couldn't work because I couldn't handle myself at work. And then my children were bothering me, and their voices were annoying, and I went again through this cycle of let's take it again out of willpower. I can do this, and I went again and again through this cycle. And it wasn't until I discovered that I had a conditional love towards my God that I understood that I had projected that same conditional love from Him towards me. So I have projected my reality into God's character. And for a long time, through those cycles of grief, I became more and more angry with Him and more disappointed with Him, because somehow I had expectations of what He needed to do to free me from this monster that was growing inside me, to free me from the circumstances that were pushing me down into this big hole that I had dug myself. So, you see, I had gone from believing and trusting Him, and then from controlling my life and going to Him whenever I needed Him, to now He's becoming this evil being, this creature that is out there to get me, that is out there to sink me into even more depression. To what now I understand through Emotional Serenity and the process of the 12-step recovery program, that what I understood of God, first I learned that it was a projection of my own reality, and second is that I was never willing, or I had never been willing to actually give control of my life to that all-loving, all-benevolent being that was seeking my own exaltation, so to speak. So, in a way, it's not that God was never there for me, it's that I refused to let Him intervene in my life. Now, when that concept sank and it was accepted and I started experiencing with it, then my whole life changed. And then my attitude towards myself, towards God, and the relationship I have with Him has been improved and increased 100-fold. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes you go back to the old habits of thinking, why something is happening to me, but now I have the tools. And this is the next step that I want to share with you. What are some of the tools that we have, that we can use to experience God? Now, in Emotional Serenity and in many other recovery programs, we talk about a couple of tools. In particular, I want to share with you 4. We've talked about meditation and prayer, and this is always a very useful, powerful tool, because when you get to know yourself as you are already connected to God, and this is what represents in the Emotional Serenity world, God is the embodiment of connectedness, right? That meditation, and you get to know yourself, and then you stand in serenity in front of Him, and prayer is the powerful tool for understanding knowledge through revelation, to get to know Him personally, to have a personal relationship with Him. And another tool that we use is what the 12-step program calls as the letting go. So as I share with my story, as soon as I understood that I had to let go of the control, that I really needed to let Him intervene in every aspect of my life, everything changed. It was open up. I could feel that happiness flowing into my life. And then two other tools that I want to share with you is that we need to understand first that love is a principle of action. So love is a defining attribute of God's character. And there is a very good verse in the New Testament, in the Bible, that says God is love. And it's one of the only places in the Bible where it actually uses the verb is, so as a defining factor. So God is love. So when we understand this and we act out of love, we get a deeper, more meaningful connection with the being of God. Right? And then another tool that is very important is that we need to practice self-gentleness. And through the process of recovery and through life in general, day to day, we make a lot of mistakes and we go back to the old ways, and it is perfectly okay. Just understand that neither your actions, neither your opinions or your thoughts define you. So you are not what you're thinking, you're not what you're doing, you're not what you idealize as your opinion. You are something different, something much more deeper than that love connectedness. So be gentle with yourself through the process of recovery. And those are the basic tools that we use in emotional recovery. Thank you for accompanying us this week, and we would love to see you in a couple more weeks on our next video. Thank you very much, and have a good week.